Hey, it's Sloth here. I'm so glad you came by. I'll get the kettle brewing while we get caught up. Welcome to Explaining Illustrations, the series where I draw an illustration and explain my thought process behind the piece and point out small details you might not notice. Today, in the spirit of Halloween, I'm going to be drawing a spooky owl house piece. Every time I rewatch the owl house, I always want to draw some ominous art for it, so I thought this would be a perfect Halloween special. I always get tons of ideas for cute wholesome art during the first two seasons, but something about season 3 alters my brain chemistry and compels me to draw spooky art. It's starting to become a tradition at this point. Listen, if they didn't want me to do ominous art, they shouldn't have given me an episode with possession at Halloween, okay? If it isn't obvious from the fact that my sick, very real workspace has 2 Owl House references in it, I love this show. It's just so good, one of my favourite shows of all time. It's funny but not afraid to get dark, and I genuinely cannot think of a single character I dislike in the show. Even throwaway background characters are given so much life and humour. I'll be leaving a link to the episodes that are up on YouTube in the description if you want to check those out. This is the section where I run down the plot of the piece of media I'm talking about, on the off chance you haven't seen it, but still want to be able to follow what I'm going on about, in an interest of making all my videos accessible even though I ping pong around fandoms. For sure not my propaganda segment to get people to watch my favourite shows. That being said, this video is going to contain major spoilers for the Owl House, so I'm going to be a little unorthodox by just getting straight into the spoilers to give you the bare bones essentials of what you need to follow this video. Honestly, at this point, even if you haven't watched the Owl House, if you've ended up on my side of the internet, then you probably know the basic premise already. Neurodivergent girl gets transported to a magical world and decides to train to become a witch. This is your last warning for incredibly major spoilers. If you've ever wanted to watch this show, I suggest you do that and come back to this video after. This show's amazing, and if you've ever needed a sign to watch it, this is it. This illustration is a fan art of the first episode of season 3, so as you can imagine a lot has happened, so we're going to speedrun this as much as possible. Ready? Okay, so the magical realm is run by a fascist leader called Emperor Belus, except oh no, he's actually a human man called Philip Wittebane, and oh no, he's a witch hunter from the 1600s who's planning to kill all the witches with a big draining spell. And his nephew Hunter, who's been acting as his right-hand man / trial soldier, actually a necromantic clone of Belus's brother who Belus killed for marrying a witch, who he seems to be just making over and over again to be able to kill him again and again. Hunter completes his redemption arc about this and joins the main friend group. But then the season 2 big fight finale happens, trying to stop the spell to kill all the witches, and a newer smaller bad guy shows up and seemingly kills Belus and turns him into a puddle of goo. The main friend group has to run away from the new bad guy and escape through a portal to the human realm, but it breaks behind them, leaving them stuck there. But as they ran through, a piece of Belus sludge got onto Hunter. Flash forwards, the kids have been stuck in the human realm for months, being taken care of by Luz's mom. It's Halloween now, and oops, turns out Belus isn't actually dead, he's just possessing stuff to build back his strength. And oh no, he possesses Hunter. And that's what you need to know to understand what I'm going to be talking about in this video. Got it? Obviously that's an extremely simplified version, but it should be enough to give you a general gist of what's going on. Seriously though, I cannot sing the show's praises enough. Season 1 is a really cute and upbeat, largely episodic adventure, just establishing the characters and world, so that Season 2 can come in and pull out the rug from under you and go, actually this show is about how fascism uses religious abuse to control people. But with our explanation out of the way, let's get into the speed paint.
Hunter, are you okay? Did you see Belus?
The first step to any large illustration is thumbnailing. It sucks to be 8 hours into a piece only to realise you have an idea you like better. I knew I wanted it to be tense and foreboding, with Belus feeling like a palpable threat, because the show does such a good job at making him hella ominous. So I sketched up these 3, one of Luz and Hunter in their masks with Belus behind them, one of Belus holding all the main kids in his hands while they reach for each other, and one with Luz and Hunter standing in front of the Wittebane brothers statue with Belus's eyes lit up on his statue. I actually liked all of these ideas, so I asked you guys over on Instagram, follow me on Instagram by the way, which one you liked best, and you voted for the statue one. The idea for this one being that Hunter and Luz would parallel Philip and Caleb, so that you'd kinda have that psychological horror of them imagining themselves to be like Belus in there too. I started this way back in April, but I decided I hated how it was going, so I just abandoned the sketch for 3 months until I decided to give her a complete makeover. Initially, Luz and Hunter were looking different ways, as if searching for Belus, but I hated how stiff their poses were. The composition was kinda unfocused, and they weren't clear as a parallel to the brothers, so I just erased them entirely and redrew them. So now they're both facing the same direction to match the statues. No, I'm not sure what they're looking at. Maybe Bellows made one of those shadow illusions like he did in the graveyard. Remember kids, if it's off screen, it's not your problem. They're also both copying the statue's poses a tiny bit. Hunter is holding Flapjack like how Caleb is holding the book. And yes, I did just trace Caleb's face and make it look younger to give to Hunter. No point in drawing the same face twice, you know. And Luz is holding up her light glyph in a similar way to Philip is holding up his scroll. Well, similar-ish. Their arms are generally almost the same angle if you squint. But while they're paralleling the statues, I also wanted it to be obvious that they're wrong to be putting themselves in Philip's shoes, and that their relationship is nothing like the brothers' was. Philip only loved Caleb insofar as it centered him and he could in some way possess him, but Luz and Hunter legitimately care about each other in a selfless way. So I wanted both of them to feel like they were protecting the other, with Hunter leaning towards Luz, both out of nerves and an attempt to shield her more easily, with Flapjack being in the ideal spot to do that, since we see him get protective of the other kids in fights a lot, and with Luz having a wide confrontational pose, having put aside her own fear and instead being mad on Hunter's behalf. I made them hold hands to once again juxtapose the Wittebanes with their supportive care for one another. I made Luz's hand go on top, so she sort of looks like she's more likely to rush forward at any moment, and that she's shielding Hunter back. Also, wow, it is hard to make characters with any height difference hold hands. I really love the way the show uses the light glyph as a symbol of Luz's goodness and kindness, as well as her good connection to the Isles, and on a larger scale a symbol of hope. So, juxtaposition Philip on a symbolic level, where his statue holds a scroll, Luz has her light spell. I made it front and centre over her heart, and it's a little heart shape too. Facial expression wise, I was going for guarded and cautious for both, but with Luz seeming angry. I feel like at this point in the show, Luz wasn't really in it for self-preservation, but only care for her friends and guilt, so I wanted to try and capture that a bit. Meanwhile, I wanted Hunter to seem more nervous, since we see him scared to confront Bellows during season 3, now having further understood and processed all of his and Bellows' relationship, or lack thereof. Unsurprisingly, if you follow me on social media, Hunter is my favourite character, which you can tell because approximately 90% of my fan art for the show is of him. Really not escaping it with this piece either. Listen, if you give me a child soldier type, especially if they're a redeemed villain, they're gonna be my favourite. This is a universally recognised truth. It may be starting to become a problem. I did debate with myself whether or not to have the wolf shirt visible, and I tragically decided not. But for the wolf shirt, you will be missed. I just didn't want his vestness tied around his waist to ruin the clarity of the pose or the lines of the composition, so his more form-fitting costume worked better for this. I also thought the orangey shirt would be more visually interesting than a black shirt with the colour palette I chose. Speaking of composition, I'm quite proud of it in this piece. I wanted the viewer's eyes to always be led to one of the 3 vocal points, which are the faces of Hunter, Luz, and Philip. So there's this circular feedback loop of most of the big lines leading back into one of those, which works like this, with all the big gestures and props feeding into it. Other details include the branches behind Philip looking like antlers, Bellows sludge on Hunter's pointer finger and crawling up his neck, as well as Luz and Hunter's loose hairs mimicking Philip and Caleb's, so there's some little Easter eggs for you if you didn't already spot them. Line art wise, I did my usual style. If you're wondering, I used the dry ink pen on Procreate. I made sure to use my line weight to indicate light, though it was a little difficult here since it has an unusual light source with the light glyph. I also added details here too. I hate redrawing the same thing over and over, so I don't do clean-up sketches. When I used to, I'd find myself abandoning art a lot because I'd lose interest. I found cutting them out of my process completely in favour of going straight from rough sketch into line art made me stick with pieces way longer, and as a bonus my lines were a lot less stiff since I didn't feel like I had to stick within these very small bounds. So if you're having a similar problem, it might be something to try out. I line and sketch with brown rather than black because it feels a lot less permanent, which makes my brain way more willing to adjust it. It's the same reason a lot of people sketch with pink, even digitally, where a lighter sketch isn't necessary for lining. Related art tip here. If you're drawing digitally, I highly advise making your background canvas anything but white. Personally, I tend to use light browns or beiges. It reduces a lot of the blank white page anxiety, and it's also better for your eyes than looking at what is essentially a blinding white flashlight. Obviously, I went full Halloween with the colour palette. I wanted one that also included the right colours for Hunter and Luz's costumes to keep them as recognisable as possible, so I went with a purple-orange theme, with lighter colours on Hunter and Luz so that they contrast the darker background and stand out as the main focal point, and Bellows in the background then has that looming threat vibe I mentioned earlier. I had to readjust my colours though. When I ran out of layers on this canvas, I switched to a CMYK colour canvas. They're supposed to be more accurate to printing colours, but it changed my flats a bit, making them less saturated and lighter. Never considered that my art was so neon until I couldn't really make anything that saturated. For reference, this is what the colour wheel I'm used to looks like versus the CMYK colour wheel. It's not a bad thing, just a little odd getting used to at first. Like breaking in new shoes. When it comes to shading, I actually started with the lighting layer first. I like to do this with pieces with really strong light sources, since shadows are an effect of light. It's like carving out where the shadows will be. This is particularly handy for me when I'm drawing a light source in a place I'm not used to, in this case under Luz's face, uplighting her. I never really bother being neat when laying down shading, because I just blend it out later and define the shapes then. I did 2 multiply layers to really make the dark shadows dark for maximum moodiness. I then go through with my dry ink and hemp brushes to make smaller lighting layers, both for the main light source and reflected light in the shadowy areas. I do this in the brightest areas and around the edges. I just like the way that this looks, and it adds a lot of texture to a piece even with my comparatively much less textured simple shading style. Your boy loves art with a bit of texture, what can I say? Lastly, for my shading, I add 6,000 different overlay layers. You can rip my overlays out of my cold, dead hands. They just make everything look way more unified, and I like to use them to lead your eye to the lightest areas, which I usually make the focal points. Though I use these ones to further the dramatic lighting and drench Bellows in some more shadows to make him feel like that dark looming figure. And then finally, we're on to the last and my least favourite step, colouring the lines. It makes a big difference to the 3D feeling of a piece and the mood, but god is it tedious as hell to do. And with that, we're done.
Have you found the blood yet?
I'm on it. I just have to...
Flapjack? Why do you look so scared?
Luz.
I'm so happy with how this piece came out. I really like the lighting effects and subtle texture, particularly on Luz's face. I do really like the colour palette, but a part of me wonders if the purples had been colder instead, if it had felt more spooky. Same with if the background had been darker. I don't know, what do you think? As it stands, I just can't resist warm colours, I guess. I also really like how Bellows' eyes came out, what with how the light reflects on his face and the chicken scratch irises. But let me know what you think, and of course if you have any ideas you'd want to see in future videos, comment below. The first episode of The Owl House and all of Season 3 are officially up on YouTube for free, so I'll leave a link to both of those in the description like I said before, in case you want to start watching or just want to rewatch Season 3. Weirdly, it seems that the only other episode Disney has up here is Eclipse Lake in Season 2. Don't get me wrong, one of the best episodes, maybe even my personal favourite. I'm just a bit confused as to why it's the only episode other than the first and all of Season 3 that's here. The rest of the episodes are available to watch on Disney+, and I'm sure nowhere else on the internet has them available to watch for free. Anyway, if you like this video and want to see more like it, but don't want to rely on the homepage suggesting my stuff again, maybe subscribe and check out my other videos. And if you're watching this video when it comes out, or on its birthday, happy Halloween! It's been nice having you all around. I hope you drop by again.